Today is episode 4, where we will be introducing Lean BIM Management. The agenda for today: what is Lean in design? We're going to talk about 6 BIM wastes, very important, phase planning, and then weekly work planning, and some key tips to get started with Lean BIM. So let's start with what is Lean in design in our industry. What is the difference between Lean in design and Lean in construction? Now, Lean design doesn't necessarily mean less design. If the contractor builds on what is Lean in design, you could end up with something like this. Not a pretty sight. They might be on time and on budget, but it's not what the client was looking for. The design process is a linear one. Well, it aspires to be a linear one. In reality, we're done with the schematics of this and development, and then the client changes their mind and we're back to rework. And then from development to documentation, and then some rework again. And then we move over onto construction because we have deadlines, and then again we have to go back because of rework in the design. So in reality, the design process looks like this. So the design process is a crazy, intertwining, tangled process that goes in loops that you can't really predict most of the time because of change. And that results in a lot of rework. And so it can be quite a complex process. The problem is the design manager or project manager has put a line in the schedule, that says that's DD, design and development. 50% is got to be done by September the 27th and 100% by October the 16th. It's often boiled down just to a single line on a schedule, and it's not very useful to many people. So what is Lean design? Some of the terms we hear are these. Like Kaizen means improvement. BIM we all know. VDC for virtual design and construction. Scrum is part of the process. Lean is design. Lean in design does not mean less design. Okay, so it means creating value for customers while minimizing waste for the design team. Rather than redesigning all the time, it's intelligently planned design with less waste, understanding what the client needs and giving just that. There are many categories of waste. There's transport, inventory, motion delays, when things are located, they aren't located closer to the point of use, overproduction of products the client hasn't ordered, overprocessing, etc. There are many delays as well, and rework is the biggest delay in design. Are there any resources to help with this? Yes, Dan Foshier is a director for Lean and Last. He's a planner, facilitator, and coach. Has a book on Lean project delivery. There's also the LCI movement that was founded in the late 90s, also driving Lean construction workflows. The question is BIM always Lean? Well, BIM is a process, and processes may or may not be Lean. Building information modeling is a set of technologies, processes, and policies enabling multiple stakeholders to collaboratively design, construct, and operate a facility in virtual space. So what could go wrong? Sometimes, quite a lot. We need to figure out what is it in our BIM that is wasteful and keep our BIM lean. So let's try and identify those 6 BIM wastes. Now, the first one is poor scoping. An overly detailed, overly generated scope can be disastrous. It will be really difficult for the disciplines to understand what the client wants if you're not able to clearly define it. Number 2 is overproduction, over-modeling, duplicate modeling, overlapping of scope, and so too much BIM resulting in rework, and then not having enough. If the client wants, for example, a quantity takeoff, and not enough BIM will result in the quantities not being correct. So over and under production, contributing to a lot of waste. Also, out of sequence work. It's all about making sure tasks get completed at the right time, in the right way. If we get them in the wrong order, even if we were to avoid a clash, it still could lose us money. On the left-hand side, the pipes don't run through the cable tray, but it will cost more in materials and time, more bends and welds. But if we get the sequence right, if we get the plumbing virtually installed before the cable tray and avoid losing time and money, how do we prioritize tasks to minimize the impact on cost? Sequencing the less expensive element to route around the other will reduce the cost. Another is waiting, whether it be for model deliverables. If you're waiting for something to do your work, or waiting for people to make decisions, especially those who are not part of the initial planning process, or the hardware that you're using isn't powerful enough to handle for example, a large model, you could end up with a lot of waste in time. We also see waste. We also see waste in a lot of rework and remodeling as well. And lastly, administration waste. You really have to get done with what's important rather than working on the administration burden. So as you can see, it takes more time than expected, and frustration starts to show. You know, he's not really happy at all, is he? So there are companies out there who are doing a better job and who are improving this. So introducing phase planning to make the design process a lot leaner. So phase planning operates at 3 levels. Firstly, the milestone level, the strategic plan, or the, as you would call it, the 30,000 view, which is between 12 to 18 months or so. And then there's the phase pull for sequence and activity handoffs, the 10,000 view, if you would call it, which is in 2 to 4 months. This is done typically 3 to 4 times or 5 times on a project. And thirdly, the weekly work plan, the schedule, or where the rubber hits the road, where there's accountability and a weekly work plan. In BIM, we define information delivery milestones. We define what is required and who's required to do that from a team perspective. So we have all of this content that we can start to build the model. But what happens if all the teams start modeling at the same time? Well, we know one of the wastes are clashes. It's a dump with a whole lot of rework. And basically, nobody is modeling according to priority. And we will end up with having to spend more on rework later on. So to combat that, we need to be advantageous, and we need to put the content in the model at the right time so that they don't have to move it. We have seen immense improvement with a priority structure. If we set the base and say these things are foundational, like architectural and structural, and then things like plumbing that need to have the slope that needs to be fixed before the flexible items, like cable trays that routes around things, being able to understand the sequence of events and how that can optimize things. So there we go. That was the slide. All right. And so having to make sure that everybody starts at the same time, so having to make sure that not everybody starts at the same time, but rather, as you can see, in these smaller bite-sized parts of the workflow, as we planned out the milestones and the phases of the project, we can start the teams at the right time and have their work always in the right place, rather than having that loop of going back and doing rework because it hasn't been planned as a sequence. So how can we use pool planning as a technique to help us? So first of all, you got to print out your cards or your sticky notes that represent the task, and making them visual is much more powerful, as it's easier to recognize and it's easier to understand. So have a little image of the element. You're going to cut them out, obviously, as safely as possible. And then start with the end task, and then plan backwards or pull backwards the sequence to get to the end task. So you're going to start with the milestone, and then what needs to happen just before that, and just before that, etc. So put those cards in order and write down the sequence of what we need to do to be able to complete the task. And that is very often left on the wall, and people go back to their desks or to their different offices or different buildings, and then there's no way of referring back to the planning. So there needs to be a way of capturing this. Fortunately, we have the ability to do this in a digital form so that everybody will have access to it. And those tasks, those cards, can be presented as the period of time that we have just committed to, and also represented so that we can have the dependencies that they have asked for, and we will have the checklist in digital form as well. So when you start working on these tasks on a weekly basis, how do you use this information and track control that on a weekly basis? Now you can filter by week, or you can remove filters. The purpose of the weekly planning and check-in is for accountability. You want to hold yourself accountable, but you also want to hold others accountable for the deliverables that you require so that you can do your work on a timely basis. And you can manage those tasks in a simple Kanban board with its visual nature and simple, drag and drop, using the filtering to see specific tasks within a specific time, and also checking off what needs to be done, making sure everything was captured in the pool planning, is then tracked and controlled and updated so that everyone knows where things are at which stage. What are the results? So a case study was done. It was a lab study where two teams, Team A and Team B, went through two exercises. The first exercise was where the teams had to run just a traditional process on a project, and their issues were evaluated afterwards. And the other exercise was when they actually had a communication and a plan on sequencing tasks, and then ran the project with those mini phases that we just discussed. And at the end of it, we see an astonishing 73% reduction in the number of issues and challenges that needed to be resolved. So that's a lot. And the second case study was then conducted, and it was a multifamily mixed-use design build project with two teams again on the same project. And the thesis here was that traditional design management follows a large batching process through schematic design, design development, construction documentation, and large batching causes information buildup, and too many assumptions are made on information which is out of date. Misunderstandings are a root cause for the most amount of waste, and all the results in incomplete and late design. So the project was done 2 months earlier than expected. So there is 17% time saving and 53% fewer issues. So we can see the benefits. And now let's look at some tips to get us started. How do we start? So firstly, who needs to be part of the session? At least one person from each firm involved in design, preferably the one doing the design, and for the initial planning session, a person from that firm with authority to commit resources. Choose the pool planning facilitator, someone who knows the process, keeps the session running on time, and is focused on making sure the entire team provides input. It's probably not the lead designer, but it could be. Call or text all attendees to ensure their participation. If your team has critical persons missing during the session, the planning will be more tentative and less complete. Where should the pool planning happen? Find a suitable room in which to hold the pool planning session. You'll need lots of uninterrupted wall space on which you can affix 2 rows of plotter paper. There should be clear space from the wall, no tables in the way. This allows plenty of group movement, which is what we want, and discussion as the pool session gets underway. Arrange the room properly, ensuring 3 to 4 meters of open space in front of the wall. Remember to print out the sticky notes. So how to prepare the team? Recommended, meet with your leadership team to set expectations at least 10 days before the session. Decide which milestone to pull from. Identify what separate areas of work will need to be pulled separately in what we call swim lanes, which might be different areas, buildings, floors, etc. Clarify any conditions of satisfaction, where for major milestones and deliverables, you will revisit each of these during the session to make needed adjustments and gain consensus, etc. What do we need? Print or have ready electronically necessary visuals to facilitate the team's discussion and understanding of the project and project needs. So confirm with them that they already have entered or will enter before the session information about their tasks and ready to print out before the session. The day of the session, make reservations for breakfast, lunch, snacks as needed. Something with some protein and lighter on the carbs is best to keep people, from getting sluggish. So in conclusion, identify your BIM customers, not only the clients, but the teams in the project which you need to provide information to. Identify waste. Sequence your virtual build. Make sure to have priority structure of which teams need to start and when. Implement pool planning. Cultivate the right environment, which is collaborative and informative, and get good food. Everybody likes food. Some resources to help your BIM team grow. Follow this link to get more information and book your masterclass accreditation sessions with us now.